Good morning readers, it's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf and welcome to another bookish breakfast. If you could just try to ignore the massive door behind me, that would be great because I can't move it at the moment. You can never see this, but the house is a bit of a building site at the moment for various reasons. So yeah, I've got 3 books to talk to you about this week, 2 of which I'm currently reading and 1 I have finished. The one that I've finished is possibly one of the best books that I've read so far this year. It's definitely going to be one that I'm going to remember and go on to recommend. So that book was Uprooted, by Naomi Novik, which came out in 2015. And I know that I'm not the first person to say that this book is really wonderful and very, very interesting. I know that I've seen it recommended by many, many booktubers over the years. But it took a colleague of mine who actually, we don't often talk about books. I don't think that we've got a huge amount of book taste in common, but she said that she really, really enjoyed it and was looking to get other books by Naomi Novik. And yeah, she happened to say it on the same day that Boase said to me, oh, I don't know what new fantasy book I'm going to read. So I recommended it to him from her. He bought it on Audible, absolutely loved it, to the extent that he persuaded me to read it as read it for the first time on Audible, which I hate doing. I really don't like reading books brand new as audiobooks. But actually it worked surprisingly well. It was really frustrating having to keep skipping back 30 seconds to make sure that I definitely got heard things right. But it's a wonderful book and it really deserves the kind of the hype that it gets. So it's a fantasy story, but it doesn't feel like typical fantasy stories. I think it's got a much more of a fairy tale type feel. It's set in a kind of Eastern European setting. The countries are called Polonia and Russia, and they are fighting a kind of ongoing battle with each other, but also with an enchanted wood that sits across the borders of the two and sends out corrupting influences that affect the people that live around it and cause them to do horrible and unpleasant things, or it swallows them into the wood. So it's definitely got a very strong feel, it reminds you of not necessarily the obvious fairy tales like Cinderella, for instance, but the ones where people fall down wells or people disappear into the forest and then come back out somebody completely different. Those kinds of things definitely play a role in the story. I really loved the magic system. It's kind of built on, I suppose, making things grow and like a connection with the earth. And it's quite a soft magic system, but I felt like it was defined enough for its purposes. Sometimes it did seem like they put some rules into place saying, oh, you can't do too much magic, but then sometimes it seemed like they exceeded it a little bit, but I enjoyed it enough that I'm willing to forgive it. I'm going to go ahead and mention the things that I liked a little bit less, just in the name of being balanced. Just to clarify, I did love this book. The 2 things that weren't so good were the pacing. So the first half, or first 2/3, is beautifully paced, and there are moments of excitement and tension, and then moments where there's time to learn more about the magic, or there's time to kind of explore a little bit more of the world. Then it gets to a point in the second half of the book where suddenly everything starts happening, and it happens very quickly, and there's no break for a good amount of time, and it doesn't seem realistic that the characters could even cope with it. And I know it's about them being kind of pushed to their limits, but it became less engaging for a short period. Sorry, the cat's trying to get in. You've got a cat flap, She's very silly sometimes. She's just sat outside kind of staring at the door like, oh, it opened. Distracted me completely. So yeah, so the pacing was a bit of an issue, and it became less engaging because for a while you could kind of feel like, okay, for the next 5 minutes all that's going to happen is things are going to get blown up, and to a certain extent it kind of feels like there's not much point to me, I'm not a big fan of battle scenes, and I know a lot of people go to fantasy for battle scenes, and it's not like a conventional 2 pitched armies battle scene. but it just felt like I could skip this chapter and I probably wouldn't lose too much. Like, I just probably need to read the first paragraph and the last paragraph. But that was only a very short section that was difficult from that point of view. The other thing that I was less keen on was the pacing. Already talked about the pacing. Was the romance, sorry. I'm not sure whether this is because the audiobook narrator, Katie Sobey, I wasn't a massive fan of her voice anyway, but the voice that she gave to the guy who turns out to be the love interest at the start, I found it a little bit too harsh and a little bit too unpleasant, and the tone of voice she gave to him when he was saying certain things made me think, this girl cannot fall in love with this man, he is way too nasty. It's possible that if I'd been reading that to myself, I wouldn't have made him kind of sound so horrible. The main character who tells the story from her perspective, Agnieszka, she thinks that he's furious with her, but you could put that down to her perception. He might not be that furious with her. And then you could adjust it slightly. But yeah, the way it was read made it sound like he was a really horrible and unpleasant person, and then it's like, why would you fall in love with this guy? But that's my side of things. On the other side, there were moments when I thought the chemistry did work quite well, so maybe it was just that beginning phase that was a little bit dodgy. There was a little bit of slightly adult content, but it was fortunately quite short, which is how I prefer adult content in books, like that there shouldn't be too much of it. I did have to question its placement in the narrative of the book, because it didn't seem very practical, but that's a different issue. So anyway, let's leave Uprooted aside for now. I definitely want to read more by Naomi Novik. I think Uprooted was a standalone book, which is a real shame because there are definitely other characters in that world that I would like to see explored. She has another standalone book called Spinning Silver, which I'm going to have to get hold of at some point. I think Bo might get it as an audiobook, and then we'll probably both listen to it. Yeah, so definitely was sold on that book. It's a good book. The other book that I've been reading some of is more of Monisha. Rajesh is Around the World in 80 Trains. I'm going to call her out on a lie for this one because I think she's on the return journey. I'm into the last third, and she's definitely not been, she's been around the northern hemisphere, but she's definitely not been around the world, unless I've forgotten her trips to the southern hemisphere, which is possible. I think she could potentially have been to Australia, but so briefly that I just forgot about it, or I wasn't particularly interested in it. But she's definitely not been to Africa, she's definitely not been to South America, she's definitely not been to like the southern Pacific areas. So then I feel like you can't really say Around the World in 80 Trains. It is shockingly common for people to say that they're going on an around the world trip and completely miss out the entire continent of Africa. That is so common, it's almost completely normalised. It's weird and a bit stupid, but people tend to just write it off really bad. But yeah, to also completely miss out South America and just the entire southern hemisphere is a little bit questionable to me. But yeah, I'm still definitely really enjoying this. Surprisingly, I've really enjoyed the bit that I've been reading this week, which is kind of that middle section there, because she went to North Korea, and I've never thought that I'm particularly interested in North Korea. Not as in like I couldn't be interested at all, but generally the things that you hear about are quite extreme, and they tend to be more on the conspiracy theory side of things. And I didn't know that tourists were allowed there, and she didn't at first as well, but she decided to go to see for herself, even though she's very aware, and she writes about how aware she is that when you go as a tourist, what you are shown is a very curated vision of the country. But I did find it fascinating because I've never really known almost anything about North Korea, and even that kind of limited perspective that she's able to give I thought was really worthwhile. So yes, that was enjoyable. And then my next book I'm absolutely loving at the moment. This is The Housekeeper's Tale by Tessa Boase. So this is, although it sounds a little bit fictional, this is a non-fiction book. So Tessa has gone through archives of country houses and identified 5 different housekeepers that have enough I guess, enough content left about them to construct a short biography. So this is a biography of 5 different housekeepers, stretching through time from 1832 up to what she describes as like the end of the housekeeper as a profession in sometime in the middle of the 20th century. I think she has perhaps not necessarily picked typical housekeepers. She's picked housekeepers that are going to have some kind of interesting content to them. So at the moment I'm reading about Sarah Wells, who was H.G. Wells's mother. But definitely, I think it's a selection of stories that have a right to be told, because I'm a member of the National Trust and the English Heritage. I like going out to old country houses. I like walking around them. I like looking at how beautiful they are, and I like the fact that they're being like preserved and looked after. But as you walk around these country houses, you always feel like you're just looking at the kind of elitist vision of England, and you're looking at the side of the wealthy owner, as opposed to the many, many other people who lived in those houses who weren't like sitting in the parlour drinking tea. What I love about this is she has taken a role in which women at that time period had a considerable amount of power. I've just read how Sarah Wells was handling up to £500,000 worth in today's money, up to £500,000 worth of cash a year in order to manage the household, manage the expenses and the estate. So she had a considerable amount of power. She had, although not complete autonomy, she had, these women had things that they could make decisions about. They were business managers, they were in control, and that's not something that we tend to hear about. So, and definitely, like, women as a whole in history aren't particularly well represented, but women who worked and women who oftentimes came from a very low position and built their way up to a better position are very much neglected. And I would recommend this to anyone who likes kind of Victorian literature or who likes just women's history in general, just to have that other perspective of the other side of what's going on in the country house. So the first housekeeper, Dorothy Dore, goes into service, and I think she starts as a housekeeper, or she definitely goes into service at the time when Jane Austen was writing, for instance. So it kind of gives you an idea of that other perspective that we sometimes don't tend to get. The other thing that I have to say on the flip side is, obviously the information about these women is quite patchy, and I get the feeling sometimes that Tessa Boase kind of wanted to be writing historical fiction as much as she wanted to be writing history, and I don't mind when she speculates a little bit. I don't mind her saying, on her first day, the housekeeper would probably have been taken on a tour of the house, and these are the areas that she probably would have been taken to. I do mind when she's describing this tour of the house, and then she says something like, she wishes she could go outside and smell the roses. Because how does she know? Obviously, Sarah Wells kept a diary. I'm going to read some little extracts from that in a sec. But I'd like to see it written in her diary, rather than being told that that's what she felt. By an author who probably wouldn't know that. Like, I'd rather it was kept just a little bit closer to the facts. There are a couple of points that I thought were worth highlighting. So in 1832 there was a cholera outbreak in England, and the first housekeeper, Dorothy Dore, her masters, I suppose, the people who were like the heads of the household, the Lord and Lady Stafford, I think, the Marquis of Stafford, had some quite strict thoughts on how the epidemic of cholera should be managed, and how the household should be protected from it. And I just thought it was a really amusing social distancing in 1832 kind of extract. All the servants have received the strictest orders that on no pretence whatever they go further eastward than Charing Cross, because in the east of London was where the cholera was happening, on pain of immediate dismissal, and that they are not to mix with any of the tradespeople. The postman now throws the letters into the house, and the newsmen, when they deliver the newspapers in the morning and evening, have to throw them over a wall. So great is the fear of contagion on the family of the noble Marquis. Which is, I think he's doing pretty well, actually. He's doing better than we are at sometimes. And then we talk a lot about the Victorians having a very high child mortality, and maybe having lots of children so that they could kind of deal with that. But talking again about infection and the consequences of that. Sarah Wells had 4 children, 3 of whom survived infancy. Her daughter passed away this is her own words from her own diary. Each line is from a different day. My firstborn child expired in my arms. God's will be done. My darling, dearest pet in her coffin, my darling only child. Oh, never did I feel such sorrow. My own beloved mother dearest was severe, but this, oh, this is worse. Oh, God. It's like a dream. Her toys and little clothes lying about. Her precious drawings. Which, I mean, the intensity of the emotion that, even though her diary is only one line a day, the amount that she is able to capture in that, it makes me really wish that we had more of her in this, and like I said, slightly less of the potentially the speculation, although I'm really, really grateful to Tessa for even beginning to put her story into an accessible format. And then just a little bit about the stresses of the job for the housekeeper. So this is Sarah Wells at a later stage in her life. I don't know if you can see her very well. And this is her handwriting. This is a page from her diary. At the very bottom it says, "What a worry this house is." So she's obviously having a little bit of a tough week. I think the cook had quit and she needed to rapidly find a new cook. So I would say Tessa Boase has definitely chosen some interesting stories. She's definitely brought them to life. And yeah, I'm really grateful to her for putting it into an accessible format. I bought this book at, I think it was at Rest Park, which I think the next Housekeeper was linked to. So that was an English heritage property and they were selling it in their shop, and I just kind of, I didn't buy it there, I saw it there and then I think I bought it online cheaper. But yeah, so I was inspired to buy it because I've been to some of the places that I mentioned, and Sarah Wells she works at Uprooted Hall in West Sussex, which is quite near to where I grew up. I don't know if I've ever been there, but it is apparently a National Trust property, so it's quite nice that you can actually go and see the places that these women worked in and kind of like see their rooms and kind of put them into, imagine them in their place. So anyway, those are my 3 books for this week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you're having a lovely reading week and a lovely week in general, and not melting too much in the heat that we're having. Or obviously if you're in different parts of the world you probably won't be, but yeah, take care everyone.